Beneath glassy surfaces, speed replaces warning and instinct outruns reason. Ordinary outings can unravel in seconds when movement triggers a silent response below. From a shattered dive cage off a seal-heavy coast to a violent night encounter in deep blue water, danger takes many forms. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters. 6 real stories carefully explored, clearly presented, and with meaningful lessons. On a clear morning of January 13, 2026, the Fletcher family embarked on a private shark cage diving expedition off the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa. Gansbaai, a small fishing town in the Western Cape, has, over recent decades, transformed into one of the world's most famous destinations for viewing the great white shark. The cold, nutrient-rich waters of the Atlantic, surging through the channel between Dyer Island and Geyser Rock, supported a vast colony of Cape fur seals, which in turn attracted large populations of these apex predators. The family, consisting of Nathan Fletcher, his wife Clara, and their 14-year-old son Eli, had saved for this adventure, viewing it as a thrilling opportunity to confront and appreciate one of nature's most formidable creatures in its own domain. Their vessel, a sturdy 6-meter craft, motored out to a known hotspot. The crew, 2 experienced local guides, briefed them on safety protocols, emphasizing the strength of the custom-built surface-tethered cage. The family, clad in thick wetsuits, listened with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The water was unusually clear and calm, a shimmering pane of glass reflecting the summer sky. Below, seals' silhouettes could be seen darting through kelp forests. Soon, the first dorsal fins cut the surface, announcing the arrival of several large sharks. The family, having signed their waivers and donned their gear, descended one by one into the steel-barred cage, which was then lowered until the water lapped at their chests. The initial moments were filled with awe. 2 great whites, each estimated at around 15 feet in length, glided past the bars, their black eyes taking in the strange intruders with passive curiosity. Nathan held Clara's hand while Eli pressed his face against the cold metal, his breath fogging his mask. The conflict, the unstated goal of their journey, was a simple human one: to experience primal fear in a controlled environment and emerge unscathed, feeling a sense of conquered wilderness. That fragile sense of control was shattered in an instant. A much larger shark, later estimated by witnesses to be a 22-foot female, approached not from the side but from the depths directly below. It ascended with a speed that defied its size, its primary goal seemingly the seals near the boat's stern. In its trajectory, the shark collided with the cage, not with a test bump, but with a full-body, devastating lunge. The force was catastrophic. The cage, struck like a bell, was slammed upward and to the side into the boat's hull with a deafening metallic shriek. Rust-weakened bolts sheared clean, and a critical weld on the doorframe split open. The structure imploded inwards, then gave way entirely. The 3 occupants were violently expelled into the open water, a tangle of limbs, bubbles, and broken metal. The shock of the cold was instantaneous, but it was secondary to the shock of sudden, unprotected immersion in the shark's territory. Their muffled screams were lost in the chaos of water and the boat's engine noise. The shark, perhaps disoriented by the impact or stimulated by the sudden movement and vibrations, turned its attention from the seals to the novel stimuli now thrashing at the surface. Nathan Fletcher was the first struck. The shark's initial bite was not exploratory but full force, clamping across his torso and dragging him under in a cloud of crimson. Clara, acting on a desperate instinct to aid her husband, dove towards the turmoil, only to be intercepted by a powerful, thrashing side strike that left her grievously wounded. On the surface, Eli Fletcher kicked wildly, trying to orient himself towards the boat's ladder, his mind blank with a terror beyond comprehension. The crew, horrified into immediate action, began shouting, splashing oars, and throwing any buoyant object at hand into the water to create a barrier of noise and disturbance. Their efforts, though valiant, were outpaced by the attack's speed. The shark returned, its movements now decisive. Eli saw a dark shape broader than a car door surge towards him from the haze. He felt a crushing pressure, then an unimaginable pull. The crew continued their frantic distraction, and the shark did eventually release its victims, disappearing into the murk as quickly as it had arrived. Within a span of minutes that felt like hours to the witnesses, the sea fell quiet, leaving behind only expanding stains on the water and floating debris. The 2 crew members, the sole witnesses to the entire event, managed to recover the bodies. The incident was reported as a tragic, unprecedented mechanical failure, compounded by extraordinarily bad luck and proximity to an exceptionally large and possibly agitated predator. Investigators later concluded that the force of the initial impact, focused on a single structural weak point, had turned a secure observation platform into a death trap. For the community of Gansbai, it was a somber day that underscored the ocean's ultimate predator's absolute and unforgiving power. The Fletcher's goal of a safe adventure had ended in the most final way possible. A brutal reminder that no cage, no protocol can ever eliminate the lethal unpredictability of the natural world. On the morning of March 18, 2025, Connor Hayes was conducting routine maintenance on the Atlas III, a fixed-leg oil production platform situated in the shallow intertidal waters of the Exmouth Gulf in Western Australia. The Gulf, a broad, semi-enclosed basin where the arid Pilbara region met the Indian Ocean, was a maze of sandflats, mangrove channels, and deep-water trenches. It was a place of stark beauty and hidden dangers, where tiger sharks and bull sharks were known to patrol, especially in the deeper channels and around structures. The platform itself was one of several older structures in the area, its steel legs perpetually crusted with barnacles and mussels, creating a complex artificial reef that attracted baitfish, rays, and other marine life. Connor, a seasoned rig worker with over a decade of experience, had been tasked with inspecting a section of corroded support beams just above the waterline, a job he had done countless times before. He was a practical man, more concerned with meeting his inspection deadline and the scorching sun than with any aquatic fauna. The conflict for Connor was a mundane one: to complete his inspection efficiently before the tide, which in the Gulf could rise and fall rapidly, made the lower sections inaccessible. He needed to tap the steel, measure the corrosion depth with an ultrasonic gauge, and log his findings. He descended the maintenance ladder bolted to one of the platform's massive legs, the water below him a murky, greenish-brown soup stirred by the outgoing tide. The sun was already fierce, reflecting off the calm surface, and the air hummed with the distant machinery of the rig. Unbeknownst to him, the tidal movement had churned up schools of mullet and herring around the structure's base, a natural occurrence that turned the platform legs into a temporary feeding station. This activity had drawn the attention of a 14-foot tiger shark, a nomadic predator known for its opportunistic, inquisitive, and often bold nature, which was now patrolling the shadowy water beneath the platform, its striped hide camouflaged in the dappled light. Connor reached the inspection point, a weld joint about a meter above the water's surface. He secured his safety harness to a ring bolt with a familiar click and began his work, tapping at the steel with a hammer and noting the extent of the corrosion in his handheld device. His legs dangled, his steel-toed boots occasionally skimming the water with each small movement as he shifted his weight. The shark, detecting the unfamiliar vibration and the silhouette of the dangling limbs from below, initiated a slow, investigative approach. It was not hunting him specifically. It was investigating an anomalous stimulus in its environment, a process that for a tiger shark often involved a test bite. The attack was not a premeditated ambush, but a sudden, explosive test bite born of curiosity. The tiger shark rose vertically from the water with surprising speed, its broad mouth opening to reveal rows of serrated coxcomb teeth. It closed over Connor's left leg from the calf downward, engulfing the boot. The force was immense, wrenching him sideways against his harness with a brutal jerk that slammed his shoulder into the steel pylon. He reported later that his first sensation was not pain, but a shocking, overwhelming pressure and the sound of crunching, grating metal as his reinforced boot and the shark's teeth met. Then the thrashing began. The shark, likely surprised by the hard, metallic taste and texture, shook its head violently in a classic prey-disabling motion, its body slamming against the steel pylon with thunderous wet blows that echoed up the structure. The noise, the splash, the impact, Connor's choked cry, immediately alerted the crew on the main deck above. Two of Connor's colleagues, Mike and Arjun, rushed to the railing and looked down into the frothing, chaotic scene. They saw the shark's distinctive blunt head and striped back, the powerful tail churning the water white, and Connor's body being whipped back and forth, held only by the strained harness. They acted without hesitation, their training overriding their shock. Shouting to alert others, they grabbed anything within reach, a large wrench, a bucket, a length of loose chain, and hurled them into the water near the struggle, creating a cacophony of splashes. Mike seized a fire hose, unlocked it, and unleashed a powerful jet of seawater directly toward the shark's head and gills. The combined stimuli, the noise, the object striking the water, and the unfamiliar pressurized hydraulics of the hose, startled the predator. Its curiosity turned to annoyance or caution. It released its grip and slid back into the deeper murk, disappearing from view within seconds. Connor's colleagues raced down the ladder, their boots slipping on the rungs. They found him conscious but in severe shock, his face ashen, his leg mangled and bleeding profusely. The reinforced material of his work pants and boots shredded like tissue paper. The harness had held, a fact that undoubtedly saved his life by preventing him from being dragged under. They performed urgent first aid, applying a tourniquet above the knee with a strap from a tool bag, and radioed for an emergency medevac helicopter from the mainland, giving terse coded coordinates. Connor Hayes survived the encounter. He was airlifted to a hospital in Perth, where he underwent multiple complex surgeries to reconstruct his leg. The injuries were severe, involving deep lacerations, compound fractures, and significant muscle and nerve damage, but they were not fatal. Investigators from the National Offshore Safety Authority later noted that tiger sharks were renowned for investigating and sometimes biting unfamiliar objects in their environment, with oil rig legs and other anthropogenic structures creating ideal grounds for opportunistic hunting and investigation. They emphasized that while such attacks were extraordinarily rare, a statistical anomaly in offshore work, the combination of low visibility, abundant marine life attracted to the structure, and human presence at the waterline created a unique if minuscule risk profile that was not adequately highlighted in standard safety briefings. For Connor, the resolution of his conflict was starkly different from his original goal. He achieved survival, but his life was permanently altered. The experience left him with a profound physical reminder, a leg that would never fully function as before, and a deep personal understanding of the hidden dangers that could lurk even in the most industrialized, seemingly tamed corners of the natural world. He later stated in interviews that he bore no malice toward the animal. It was simply being what it was, in a place where he was the visitor. The Fitzroy River in Western Australia's Kimberley region was in full flood in mid-March of 2024, a sprawling caramel-colored torrent that had spread across its vast floodplain, submerging stands of paperbark trees and transforming the landscape into an immense inland sea. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of wet earth and blooming gums. Near the remote community of Fitzroy Crossing, a makeshift adventure tourism operation had set up a river zip line, capitalizing on the seasonal surge. The concept was simple and exhilarating. Participants would harness themselves to a pulley on a strong cable strung between two tall, sturdy trees on opposite banks. They would launch themselves out over the raging water, dropping several feet into the deep, fast-flowing current, before being pulled, dripping and euphoric, to the far shore. It was the kind of raw, unregulated adventure that attracted thrill seekers looking for an adrenaline rush beyond the sanitized confines of a theme park, a direct engagement with the power of a wild river. Ethan Cooper and 3 of his university friends had traveled north from Perth for this specific experience, part of a broader road trip seeking out Australia's rugged heart. The conflict for Ethan was a personal challenge, a test of nerve against the powerful, primal force of the flooded river. He wanted to conquer the apprehension, to feel the drop and the cold shock, and to emerge victorious. After watching his friends, Liam, Chloe, and Maya, complete the jump with wild whoops and triumphant shouts, he stepped up to the wooden launch platform. His heart hammered with anticipation. He secured the harness, gave a thumbs up to the operator, and without hesitation, leaped from the platform. The wind rushed past him as he zipped across the broad expanse of muddy water, the world a blur of brown and green. At the midpoint, as designed, he detached from the main line, dropping the remaining 10 feet into the cool, turbid flow with a massive, satisfying splash. The impact of the water was expected. The effect that followed was not. The sudden large disturbance in the river, a major splash in an otherwise flowing system, combined with the seasonal presence of bait fish like archerfish and perch, concentrated by the floodwaters, created a moment of high activity. This attracted the attention of a juvenile bull shark approximately 6 feet. Bull sharks, uniquely adapted to both salt and fresh water through advanced osmoregulation, were known to travel far upriver along the Fitzroy, especially during the wet season when salinity levels dropped and prey was abundant. This individual, likely a young male, was driven by the opportunistic and often bold instincts of a predator learning its environment. It interpreted the splash and the sight of the dangling, kicking limbs of the human as potential prey, an injured animal, or simply a curiosity worth inspecting with its mouth. As Ethan surfaced, sputtering and disoriented from the plunge, he felt a jarring solid impact on his right calf. A vice-like pressure clamped down, and he was pulled briefly underwater. He later recalled the surreal, slowed-down sensation of being shaken, like a dog with a toy, and the blinding burst of panic that followed, a chemical fire in his brain. He kicked out frantically with his free leg, his arms flailing to stay above the surface, his mouth gasping for air. On the far bank, his friends saw the commotion, the unusual, frantic thrashing unlike their own playful surfacing. Liam, with the sharpest eyes, spotted a dark, rounded dorsal fin cutting the water near Ethan and shouted a warning. They began yelling and waving their arms, grabbing the long canoe paddles they had left on the bank and slapping the surface of the river with all their strength, trying to create a disturbance to divert the shark's attention. The shark, likely a juvenile still honing its assessment skills, released its grip after a few seconds of thrashing. It did not immediately flee but circled Ethan cautiously, its snout occasionally nudging his side as he desperately tried to orient himself towards the retrieval rope, now being thrown to him by the zipline operator from the far bank. The combination of Ethan's own frantic defensive movements, the shouting from the bank, and the repeated loud slaps of the paddles striking the water seemed to confuse and deter the young animal. After what felt like an eternity but was later estimated by his friends to be less than 30 seconds, the shark turned with a flick of its tail and vanished into the murky, sediment-filled depths. Ethan's friends hauled him to the bank where he collapsed in the mud, gasping and shaking with shock and adrenaline. His calf bore a series of deep, semicircular lacerations, where the shark's teeth had raked and punctured the muscle. The wounds were clean but bled freely. He was bruised and battered from the bite and the subsequent frantic struggle against the riverbank. The group, sober and efficient, administered basic first aid, using a clean shirt to apply direct pressure to the wounds, and helped him to their four-wheel drive vehicle. They drove him to the nearest medical clinic in Fitzroy Crossing, a basic outpost that stabilized him before he was transferred to a larger hospital in Broome. Ethan Cooper survived the encounter with no life-threatening injuries, though the physical scars, both jagged and neat, would remain as a permanent map of the encounter. Marine biologists later explained that bull sharks in river systems, while not typically seeking humans, often made rapid exploratory bites to identify unfamiliar objects. The scenario of a solitary, splashing individual entering the water presented a classic, if rare, trigger for such an investigative strike. For Ethan, the resolution was a profound lesson in humility and context. He had sought to conquer the river's force for a thrill, but instead learned a harsh, visceral lesson about the unseen ancient inhabitants within it. His goal of a thrilling adventure was technically accomplished, but at a cost that forever changed his perception of wild waterways. He later said he developed a deep respect for the river not just as a force of water, but as a living ecosystem, one that commanded caution rather than conquest. The coastline of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, on a July afternoon, could deceptively resemble a milder version of the Caribbean. On July 9, 2021, the waters off a secluded, privately owned stretch of beach in Wellfleet were unusually warm and calm, the surface a shimmering sheet of mercury under a hazy midday sun. The beach was empty save for the Caldwell family, Derek Caldwell, his wife Vanessa, and their 15-year-old daughter Jenna. They were enjoying the relative solitude, a rare gift on a Cape Cod summer day, swimming beyond the gentle breakers where the water was deep, clear, and refreshing. Unseen to them, the area's ecological dynamics had shifted dramatically in recent years. A successfully rebounding population of gray seals, protected by law, had established major colonies on the outer Cape's sandbars and beaches, and following them as surely as a shadow were great white sharks. The waters that day were also teeming with dense schools of menhaden, a preferred baitfish, whose silvery flashes and nervous vibrations attracted predators from the deep. The seals frolicked in the distance, their barks carried on the breeze. For the Caldwells and their daughter, the conflict was simply one of leisure against the backdrop of daily life. They were a close-knit family from suburban Boston seeking a respite, a perfect summer moment of family connection away from crowds in the digital world. Derek, a strong swimmer and former college athlete, led the way further out, playfully challenging Vanessa and Jenna to follow him to a spot he deemed the perfect float. They complied, laughing, bobbing in the gentle swell, utterly disconnected from the complex, active food web beneath them. They were interlopers in a busy wild space, unaware of the traffic around them. The attack, when it came, was a sudden, catastrophic eruption of violence that forever shattered the tranquil postcard scene. An immense great white shark, later estimated by investigators from the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy to be 18 feet in length and over 2 tons, had been cruising the periphery of the dense Menhaden bait ball. Derek Caldwell's movements, perhaps the rhythmic kicking of his legs or his distinct silhouette against the bright surface, triggered an instinctive predatory response. The shark, a supremely adapted sensing machine, misinterpreted the signal. It rose from the depths at a steep angle, its counter-shaded body a gray missile. It breached the surface partially, its cavernous mouth opening wide as it engulfed Derek's upper thigh and hip. The bite force, measured in tons per square inch, was applied with such explosive power that it pulled him under instantly in a geyser of white spray and dark blood. Vanessa, who had been floating a few yards away, saw the eruption. Her mind, refusing to process the image, initially registered it as a whale or a large dolphin. Then she saw the blood. Operating on a visceral protective instinct that overrode all self-preservation, she screamed her husband's name, a raw, torn sound, and dove toward the spot where he had disappeared. It was a fatal act of courage and love. The shark, in its state of predatory stimulation, and with multiple targets now in the stimulus-rich, blood-clouded water, turned with terrifying efficiency. It struck Vanessa as she entered the red cloud, its teeth seizing her around the torso and shaking her violently in a classic kill behavior. Jenna, treading water just yards away, witnessed the entire nightmarish sequence in a state of paralyzed, silent horror. She saw the dark fin, the horrifying size of the animal, the violence done to her father and then to her mother. She saw her mother's body go limp. Jenna herself could not scream. Her throat locked shut in sheer terror, and only a stream of bubbles escaped her mouth as she instinctively backpedaled, her mind screaming at her limbs to move but her body feeling leaden, trapped in the nightmare. The commotion was finally noticed from the shore by a lone lifeguard, Sam O'Connell, stationed farther down the public beach. He saw the distant splashing, the unusual disturbance, and then the tinge of red even from hundreds of meters away. He grabbed his rescue board and sprinted into the surf, paddling furiously toward the scene with a strength born of adrenaline. As he approached, he began splashing his hands and pounding on the board, yelling, "Hey! Hey!" in a desperate attempt to disrupt the attack and draw attention to himself. Another witness, a homeowner named Arthur Finch on the bluff above, had been watching the family through binoculars, enjoying the pastoral scene. He saw the attack unfold in horrifying detail, fumbled for his phone and called 911 with a trembling voice, reporting a shark attack with multiple people in the water. Sam, the lifeguard's aggressive approach and the noise, combined with the shark's likely satiation after 2 substantial bites, caused it to release Vanessa's body. By the time Sam reached Jenna, who was catatonic, barely keeping her head above water, and staring vacantly at the spot where her parents had been, the sea had begun to calm. The shark was gone, leaving behind a spreading stain and unbearable silence. Sam pulled Jenna onto his board, speaking to her in calm, firm tones she would never remember, and towed her to shore. He then returned with backup from other arriving responders to recover the bodies of Derek and Vanessa Caldwell. Both had succumbed to catastrophic, unsurvivable injuries within moments of the attack. Jenna was treated for shock and minor physical abrasions, but the psychological wounds were profound and permanent. The official investigation by the state's shark research team concluded that the presence of large adult great white sharks near popular swimming areas, while still statistically a very low risk, was an established and growing reality of the changed Cape Cod ecosystem, a successful conservation story with tragic, unintended consequences. The attack was deemed a classic case of mistaken identity, a swimmer's silhouette resembling a seal, and opportunity in an area extraordinarily rich with the shark's natural prey. For Jenna Caldwell, the resolution of that summer day was the end of her family as she knew it, and the end of her childhood. The goal of a peaceful, connecting family swim had culminated in an unimaginable public tragedy, a personal loss that echoed as a grim, high-profile reminder of the wild and untamed nature that still existed, and now thrived, just beyond the sandy beaches of a modern American coastline. The incident led to increased investment in shark monitoring technology, emergency alert systems, and public education, a small legacy born from immense loss. The Coral Sea, stretching east from the Great Barrier Reef into the profound blue emptiness of the Pacific Ocean, is a realm of deep trenches, isolated seamounts, and abyssal plains. It is a place where the horizon is a perfect, unbroken line, and the depth beneath is measured in miles. On January 12, 2026, the sailing yacht Wayfinder was on a live-aboard research and photography voyage, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest land, en route to a remote atoll. The sea state was moderate, with a long, rolling swell that gave the world a gentle, perpetual motion, a slow, deep breath. Aria Mercer, a freelance marine photographer specializing in remote pelagic environments, was on deck in the late afternoon. Her conflict was a technical, minor one: to secure a loose halyard that was slapping against the mast in the breeze, a sound that would ruin her planned time-lapse shot of the sunset and potentially chafe the line. She was experienced and capable, having spent cumulative years on various research and charter vessels, but the ocean's randomness respected no resume. As she reached across the gunwale to grab the flapping line, a larger-than-expected swell, a rogue roller in the steady set, lifted the stern of the Wayfinder and then dropped it into a trough. The deck tilted sharply. Her boots, slick with a fine layer of salt spray, lost purchase on the varnished teak. She stumbled, her center of gravity tipping past the point of recovery. There was a moment of weightlessness, then the shocking, cold embrace of the sea as she plunged over the side. The shock of the water was immediate, a slap that stole her breath. She surfaced, gasping, as the Wayfinder, carried by its momentum and the swell, began to drift away from her at an alarming speed. The sheer scale of her predicament struck her, a single head in a vast blue desert. She was alone in the open ocean, the deepest and most exposed environment on the planet, where the only rule is the law of the wild. Aria knew the protocols. She fought the instinct to swim frantically after the boat, only to waste energy. She stayed as still as possible, conserving heat and strength, and waved an arm, hoping to be seen from the departing yacht. The crew was below deck, engaged in navigation and meal prep. It was in these first few minutes of terrifying solitude that a dorsal fin broke the surface about 50 meters away, cutting a silent, unwavering path toward her. The shark was an oceanic white-tip, a species evolutionarily perfected for the endless blue, with long, rounded pectoral fins like the wings of a glider. It was a 12-foot adult, notoriously bold and investigative, known to mariners and scientists as often the first to arrive at any disturbance in the open sea. A shipwreck, a carcass, a lone swimmer. To the shark, Aria was a novel object, possibly injured or vulnerable, absolutely worth a close inspection. Its approach was direct, confident, and unhurried. The initial contact was a rough, solid bump against her legs, a sensory investigation. Then, with a swiftness that belied its previous languid pace, the shark turned in a tight arc and clamped its jaws onto her left calf. The pain was searing, a hot puncture followed by a wrenching pull that threatened to drag her under. Aria reacted instinctively, a survival scream trapped in her throat. She kicked out with her free foot, connecting solidly with the shark's snout, and thrashed her arms, splashing wildly in an attempt to startle the predator away, to make herself appear larger, more troublesome than worthwhile. On the Wayfinder, the skipper, Captain Roland, had just come up to the deck for a check and noticed the loose halyard secured in an odd knot and Aria's absence. He immediately called her name, then raised the alarm. The crew scrambled. It was the cook, Leo, who spotted the tiny splashing dot off the port stern and, with a curse, saw the distinctively white-tipped fin circling it. Captain Roland immediately initiated a frantic man-overboard turn, a slow and complex process under sail alone. He fired the engine to aid the maneuver. As the yacht began its wide, agonizingly slow turn, the crew started their counterattack. They shouted, hurled life rings and buoyant fenders overboard to mark the spot and create disturbance, and beat the water with boat hooks and a spare oar. Leo, remembering an old story, grabbed a deck hose, turned on the saltwater pump at full pressure, and sprayed a high-pressure stream in the shark's general direction from the heaving deck. The oceanic white-tip, undeterred by Aria's initial splashing, was now in a state of heightened interest, stimulated by the taste of blood in the water. It released its bite but circled closely, repeatedly nudging Aria's body with its snout. pushing her, testing her reaction, its dark eye indifferent. The crew's distant but escalating disturbances, the objects hitting the water, the growing noise of the approaching engine, the strange jet of water, finally tipped the balance. As the Wayfinder drew closer, its hull cutting between Aria and the shark, the Predator gave a final slow circle, as if weighing its options, then descended vertically out of sight into the deep blue. Aria was hauled aboard by strong hands, pale and shivering violently from shock, adrenaline, and blood loss. Her calf bore deep, clean puncture wounds and lacerations from the shark's teeth, injuries that were serious and would require surgery and leave significant scarring, but were miraculously not life-threatening. The shark had not hit a major artery. Experts consulting on the incident later noted that oceanic whitetips possess a unique psychological boldness in pelagic environments, where encounters with potential food sources are rare, and their investigative, persistent behavior is a key survival trait. This curiosity can quickly escalate to biting when investigating solitary, vulnerable targets. The resolution for Aria Mercer was one of survival forged by both her own frantic defensive resistance and the timely, aggressive, multi-sensory response of her crew. Her original goal had merely been to secure a rope for a better photograph. The ocean had presented a far more dire and fundamental challenge. She survived with a profound and personal respect for the utter isolation and indifference of the open sea, and the curious, uncompromising predators that are its true masters. She returned to work after her recovery, but her photography thereafter took on a darker, more respectful understanding of the blue void. Cocos Island, a remote volcanic peak cloaked in mist and rainforest rising from the eastern tropical Pacific roughly 550 kilometers off the coast of Costa Rica, is a mecca for marine biologists. Its protected waters are a legendary gathering site for vast, mesmerizing schools of scalloped hammerhead sharks, which congregate around its pinnacles and cleaning stations in numbers rarely seen anywhere else on Earth. On the night of July 30, 2025, Diego Ramos, a passionate graduate student in marine ecology from the University of Miami, was participating in a sanctioned research dive off the island's northern point, known as Manuelita. The dive plan, led by a senior researcher, was to observe the nocturnal behavior of the hammerheads, which often ascended into shallower waters after dark, possibly to feed or socialize in ways not seen during the day. The setting was otherworldly. Inky black water, pierced only by the narrow beams of dive lights, revealing endless galaxies of bioluminescent plankton that sparkled like underwater stars when disturbed. The conflict for Diego was between scientific passion and the formidable challenges of a difficult environment. His specific goal was to document any cleaning symbiosis or unique interactions between the hammerheads and smaller fish species in the dark. He was an experienced, certified diver, but the reduced visibility, the disorienting effect of the moving light beams, and the sheer awe-inspiring number of sharks, dozens of silhouettes gliding in and out of the cone of light, created a sensory overload. Eager to get a clearer, unobstructed view of a passing large female, he swam slightly away from the tight-knit main dive group, believing he was still within the safe, loose formation. For a moment he found himself in a pocket of isolation, his focused light beam the only point of reference in the immense black abyss, the bubbles from his regulator the only sound. He swung his light to track the female. The shark, later estimated at 12 feet in length, was itself in a state of sensory overload in the dark. Hammerheads, with their widely spaced eyes and ampullae of Lorenzini, rely heavily on electroreception and other non-visual senses. The sudden, bright, focused light in the dark water, illuminating swirling particles and small fish, created a confusing sensory anomaly right next to Diego's unfamiliar, bubbling shape. This may have triggered a defensive, startled, or intensely curious response. Without the typical warning signs of an arched back or rapid movement, the shark turned not away but toward the source of the disturbance. In a single, fluid, and startlingly fast motion, it lunged, its wide, peculiar head turning slightly at the last second as it clamped down. Diego felt a crushing pressure on his right fin and a simultaneous searing pain in his calf. The bite was not a sustained predatory attack, but a rapid series of 2 or 3 investigative closures of the jaws, a nip from an animal whose mouth was over a foot wide. He reacted with a burst of involuntary, panicked thrashing, kicking hard with his injured leg and swinging his light arm wildly, creating a strobing, chaotic light show. His dive partner, Maya Chen, a fellow student, saw the commotion through the gloom, the wild swinging of Diego's light and the sudden proximity of a large hammerhead. Reacting with admirable presence of mind, Maya swam aggressively toward him, not directly at the shark, but positioning herself between it and Diego. She waved her own light in wide, frantic arcs across the shark's predicted path and splashed vigorously with her free hand right in front of its head to create startling water movement and visual disruption. The hammerhead, having made its curious, tactile investigation, released its grip. It did not flee immediately, but hovered at the edge of the cone of light, its unmistakable alien profile ghostly and ominous, for a few more seconds, as if processing the data, before melting back seamlessly into the all-encompassing darkness. Diego, his heart hammering against his ribs, signaled urgently to Maya with a cutthroat gesture and a thumbs up for an emergency ascent. They began a controlled but rapid ascent to the surface, closely monitoring their computers and each other, while managing the critical risk of decompression sickness as they fled the encounter. Back on the support boat, under the bright deck lights, Diego removed his wetsuit to reveal deep bleeding puncture wounds on his calf and significant bruising across his fin where the shark's unique teeth had gripped. The injuries, while painful and requiring immediate cleaning and stitches from the expedition medic, were not life-threatening. No major muscles or tendons were severed. Marine biologists on the trip later analyzed the event, concluding it was a highly atypical but explainable case of an exploratory bite. Hammerheads are generally shy, timid creatures that present almost no threat to humans. However, in the unique and stressful conditions of a night dive with temporarily isolated divers, the combination of severely limited visibility, a focused light beam potentially disorienting the shark, and the proximity could provoke a rare investigative nip born of confusion or defense rather than predation. For Diego Ramos, the resolution was a stark and painful deviation from his research goals. He had sought to observe natural behavior quietly, but instead became an involuntary, active participant in an extreme behavioral outlier. The experience left him with a nuanced and deeply personal understanding. Even the most studied, typically benign and elegant creatures could deliver a potent physical reminder of their essential wildness and the limits of human experience when encountered on their own terms, in the profound and silent dark of their domain. His academic pursuit continued, now tempered by first-hand, scar-born knowledge of the fine line between observation and intrusion in the deep sea.